Picture this. September 490 BC. You are an Athenian hoplite, crouched behind your bronze face shield on a sun-scorched plain 26 miles from home. Your legs are trembling, not from fear, though fear is there, coiled in your stomach like a serpent, but from the weight. 70 pounds of bronze and iron. Helmet, breastplate, greaves, shield, spear, sword. You've been standing in this hell for 4 days. The heat is crushing. Inside your helmet, sweat stings your eyes. You can taste the salt on your lips, mixed with dust and the copper tang of your own dried blood where the helmet's edge has rubbed your neck raw. Your throat is a desert. The water skins ran low yesterday. And then you see them, across the plain, stretching from the mountains to the sea. The Persian army begins to move, not marching, advancing. 25,000 men in a tide of color, purple and gold and crimson, their scale armor glittering like fish scales in the morning sun. The ground itself seems to shudder. The sound reaches you in waves. Drums, cymbals, war cries in a dozen languages you don't understand. Behind them, their ships. 100 triremes pulled up on the beach, ready to sail around Cape Sounion and burn Athens to ash while your wives and children sleep. You are one of 10,000. They are 25,000. Your general has just ordered you to attack. This is Marathon, the day a handful of farmers destroyed an empire, the day the impossible became history. Before diving into the forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand what happened at Marathon, we must strip away the romantic myths. For 25 centuries, we've been told a story of Greek heroism, brave warriors defending freedom against Oriental despotism. That story is not entirely wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. Here is what history usually tells us. The Persians invaded Greece. The Athenians bravely defended their homeland. They won through courage and superior Greek warrior spirit. Roll credits. That is a lie. Or rather, it's a fairy tale wrapped around a core of brutal tactical genius. Let's examine the mathematical reality of September 490 BC. The Persian Empire, stretching from India to Egypt, from the Caucasus Mountains to the Arabian Desert, has just unleashed a punitive expedition against two rebellious city-states, Athens and Eretria. The crime? These Greek cities supported an Ionian revolt against Persian rule. The Persian Emperor Darius I doesn't forget insults. He wants revenge. He wants submission. He wants to make an example that will echo across the Mediterranean for generations. He sends his best, Commander Datis, a Median general with decades of experience crushing rebellions. Admiral Artaphernes, nephew of the emperor himself. 600 ships. 25,000 professional soldiers. Cavalry from the steppes, archers from Babylon, infantry from a dozen conquered nations. These are not conscripts. These are the most sophisticated military machine the world has ever seen, backed by the wealth of continents. Against them, Athens fields 10,000 hoplites. Not professional soldiers. Citizen soldiers. Farmers, merchants, craftsmen who own enough property to afford armor. They train perhaps 40 days a year. Their experience comes from small border skirmishes with neighboring city-states over stolen olive groves. They have no cavalry, no archers to speak of, no navy to intercept the Persian fleet, and they stand alone. Sparta, the legendary warrior state, has sent a message. They'll come help after their religious festival ends. In a week, maybe 2. By then, Athens will be ruins. The Persians have already proven their capabilities. 3 weeks ago, they landed at Eretria, Athens' ally, and after 6 days of siege, razed it to the ground. Every building burned. The population enslaved. The ashes still visible across the strait. Now those same Persians have landed at Marathon, a coastal plain deliberately chosen for its flat terrain, perfect for cavalry charges. Persian cavalry that can ride down infantry like a scythe through wheat. The beach offers a clear retreat to their ships. The mountains at their back prevent encirclement. It's a tactical fortress. The odds? 2.5 to 1 in numbers. Immeasurably worse in experience, resources, and strategic position. By every calculated metric, by every historical precedent. What happened here should have been impossible. Athens should have negotiated, submitted, or been destroyed. One of those three outcomes was inevitable. Instead, they chose a fourth option that military theorists still study today. For days earlier, Athenian scouts had raced back from Marathon with news that turned the assembly chamber to stone. The Persians have landed. The debate that followed was not about courage. It was about mathematics and survival. 10 generals stood before the Athenian War Council, each representing one of the city's tribes. 5 argued for waiting behind Athens' walls. The logic was sound. Force the Persians to besiege a fortified position, drag out the conflict until Sparta arrived, hope for disease or supply problems to weaken the invaders. It was a textbook response. 5 others, led by a general named Miltiades, argued the opposite. They should march out immediately and meet the Persians in open battle. The assembly thought this was madness. Miltiades was no ordinary general. He lived among the Persians, governed territory in their empire, understood their tactics intimately. He'd fought with them and against them. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. If we wait, Athens burns. The Persians will sail their fleet around Cape Sounion, while we sit behind our walls watching. They'll land at Phalerum Bay, 2 miles from the city center, and Athens will be surrounded. We'll have to sally out anyway, but exhausted and desperate, with the enemy at our backs. The vote was deadlocked, 5 to 5. The deciding vote fell to the polemarch, the war archon Callimachus, an old man, an administrator, not a warrior, the kind of bureaucrat usually forgotten by history. He listened to both sides present their cases. He calculated, he prayed, and then he said one word: march. This wasn't just military calculation. It was existential gamble. In Greek culture, the hoplite represented something deeper than a soldier. He was a citizen who owned land, who had a vote, who had everything to lose. When Athenian hoplites marched a marathon, they were marching to defend an idea barely 40 years old: democracy, government by the people, not by kings or emperors or priests. Persia represented the opposite: the divine right of empire, the inevitability of submission. One king ruling millions from a golden throne in Persepolis. On that vote, 5 to 5, broken by one old man's courage, turned the future of Western civilization. The Athenian army marched north that night, 10,000 men in bronze, carrying everything they owned on their backs, leaving Athens defended by old men and boys. Behind them, their families watched from the city walls. If
the army died at Marathon, there would be no second line of defense. No retreat, no mercy. They reached Marathon at dawn and took position in the foothills, staring down at the Persian camp sprawled across the plain. And then they waited, for 4 days, in the heat, in the dust, watching the Persians watching them, knowing that every hour that passed was another hour for Spartan reinforcements to march closer, another hour for Persian patience to fray. Miltiades understood something crucial. The Persians couldn't wait forever. Their supplies were limited. Their timetable was tight. They needed to finish Athens and move on to the next rebellious city. The siege of Eretria had taken 6 days, an eternity in Persian calculations. So he waited. And while he waited, he planned. The plain of Marathon is approximately 1 mile wide, squeezed between mountains and sea. The Persians held the center and the beach. The Athenians held the high ground in the foothills, a strong defensive position but strategically useless. From the hills, they couldn't stop the Persians from sailing around to Athens. They could only watch. Miltiades studied the terrain like an engineer studies a blueprint. He noted the distance, approximately 1 mile of open ground between the Greek position and the Persian camp. He noted the marsh on the southern edge, terrain that would bog down cavalry. He noted the olive groves that could provide cover for an approach. He noted the width of the plain, narrow enough that numbers became compressed, but wide enough for envelopment if executed correctly. And he conceived something revolutionary. The traditional Greek battle formation, the phalanx, was a rectangle of men, usually 8 ranks deep. Shields overlapped. Spears projected forward. It moved as one organism, grinding forward through sheer mass and cohesion. The strength was in the center, the deepest point, where the best warriors fought, where the weight of the formation concentrated. Miltiades planned the opposite. He would thin his center to just 4 ranks, barely enough to maintain formation cohesion. The wings, however, would be 8 ranks deep, sometimes more. From above, the Greek formation would look like a crescent moon, strong on the edges, weak in the middle. This violated every tactical principle. The center was where battles were won, where the commanders fought, where the pushing match of othismos, the crush, would be decided. Thin the center, and you invite the enemy to break through. Once the center collapsed, the army disintegrated into fleeing individuals hunted down by cavalry. Miltiades' officers argued against this. His own men questioned it. But Miltiades knew something they didn't. He was counting on the center to break. He explained it in terms they could understand. We cannot match their numbers across the width of the plain. If we form 8 ranks deep along the entire line, our flanks will be exposed. The Persians will simply wrap around and surround us. But if we extend our line to match theirs, short of foothills, we prevent envelopment. Yes, our center will be weak. Yes, the Persians will likely break through there. But while they're driving into our center, our wings, strong, deep, unbreakable, will hold. And then we do to them what they planned to do to us. It was a trap, a deliberate invitation to walk into a killing field. On the morning of the 5th day, September 12th, for 90 BC, Persian scouts reported movement in the Greek camp. The Athenians were forming up, not retreating to Athens, not holding their defensive position, advancing. The Persian commanders were initially confused, then delighted. The Greeks were coming down from their hills to fight in the open. Cavalry terrain. Exactly where Persia wanted them. This would be over by midday. Datis gave the order, form battle lines. Prepare to receive them. Let the Greeks exhaust themselves crossing the plain, then unleash the cavalry to shatter their flanks and ride them down as they fled. The Greek line formed in the foothills, a bronze wall nearly a mile wide, glinting in the morning sun. 10,000 men standing shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield. The heat was already building. Inside their helmets, the world narrowed to a slit of vision. Peripheral sight gone, just a tunnel view forward toward the enemy. They could see the Persians now in detail. The scale armor, the wicker shields, the bows, the cavalry in gleaming formation on the flanks. They could see the sheer mass of them, stretching across the plain like a river of men. Miltiades stood in the center of the line with the weakest troops, the youngest, the least experienced. The veterans he'd placed on the wings under the command of Callimachus on the right and Themistocles on the left. These were the men who would have to hold. These were the men the trap depended upon. He raised his spear. And then came the order that made Persian commanders think the Greeks had lost their minds. Advance at a run. Not a march. A run. In full armor. Across a mile of open ground. In formation. This was insanity. Men don't run in phalanx formation. The cohesion breaks down, the line fragments, soldiers arrive breathless and disorganized. The Persians would have time to shower them with arrows, to prepare cavalry charges, to position for maximum advantage. But Miltiades had calculated differently. The Persian advantage was arrows and cavalry. Arrows needed time, multiple volleys to weaken a formation before the infantry clash. Cavalry needed space to build momentum for charges. If the Greeks could cross the killing ground quickly, if they could close the distance before the Persians fully prepared, they could neutralize both advantages. It was a desperate gamble based on one assumption, that Greek heavy infantry, despite their weight, despite their armor, were fit enough to run a mile and fight immediately after. The trumpet sounded. 10,000 men began to run. Imagine it, the sound of bronze feet hammering the earth in rhythm. The dust cloud rising. The war cry, Allelu, building from a roar to a thunder that drowned out thought itself. Spears held high, shields up, legs pumping beneath 70 pounds of armor. The tunnel vision inside the helmet narrowing further as sweat poured, as lungs burned, as the distance closed. 800 yards, 600, 400. The Persians stared. Some later claimed the Greeks were drunk or possessed. Who charges like this? Who runs toward death? The Persian archers loosed. Arrows arced into the sky, thousands of them, darkening the sun for a heartbeat. They fell among the Greeks like rain. Men stumbled, fell, were trampled by the ranks behind. Shields sprouted arrow shafts like porcupine quills. But the Greeks didn't stop. They didn't slow. The casualties were absorbed by the mass, the momentum was unstoppable. 300 yards. 200. The Persian cavalry on the flanks began to move, but too late. The Greeks were already too close, the timing disrupted. Instead of organized charges, the cavalry found themselves facing a bronze wall appearing out of the dust cloud with shocking speed. 100 yards. The archers dropped their bows and grabbed spears. The front lines braced. And then, impact. If this story of survival against impossible odds resonates with you, please give this video a like. It truly helps these stories reach more people. And don't forget to subscribe, so you don't miss our next deep dive into histories. Turning points. The collision was not heroic. It was physics. 10,000 men in bronze armor, running at near-sprint speed, carrying 60-pound shields and 8-foot spears, slamming into a line of lightly armored infantry. The sound was like 1,000 blacksmiths hammering anvils simultaneously, a metallic scream that echoed off the mountains and silenced the Persian war drums. The Greek spears hit first. 8-foot ash shafts tipped with iron punched through wicker shields, through leather armor, through flesh and bone. Men in the Persian front line were lifted off their feet by the momentum, impaled, thrown backward into their own ranks. The Greek shields followed, bronze-faced, convex, 3 feet across, used as battering rams. Persians in the front ranks simply disappeared, crushed under the momentum, trampled into the dust. But the Persian line didn't break. This was the empire's professional infantry, veterans of a dozen campaigns from the Indus to the Nile. They absorbed the shock. They held. They pushed back. And this is where Miltiades' gamble revealed itself. The Persian commanders focused their best troops on the center, where the enemy commanders traditionally fought, where battles were traditionally won. They saw the Greek center as the threat. They didn't notice that it was only 4 ranks deep. The Greek wings, meanwhile, 8 ranks deep, packed with veterans, crashed into the Persian flanks like avalanches. On the right wing, Callimachus led the charge personally. Ancient sources tell us he fought in the front rank, a general, in the place of maximum danger, pushing forward step by step. His shield was later found with dozens of arrow holes, testament to the carnage he waded through. On the left wing, Themistocles, who would later save Greece again at Salamis, commanded with ice-cold precision. The Greek wings didn't just hold. They advanced. Meter by meter, they ground forward, pushing the Persian flanks back, rolling them up. In the center, exactly as planned, the Persians broke through. The thin Greek center, 4 ranks of inexperienced troops, buckled under the weight of Persian numbers. Men were pushed backward, then began to flee. The Persian center surged forward in pursuit, thinking they'd won. Their commanders saw the Greek line splitting, saw the rout beginning, saw victory. They didn't see the trap closing. As the Persian center drove forward in disorganized pursuit, the Greek wings completed their destruction of the Persian flanks. And then, with veteran discipline, they executed the most difficult maneuver in ancient warfare. They wheeled inward. Both wings, thousands of men in perfect formation, turned 90 degrees and closed like jaws on the exposed flanks of the Persian center. The Persians suddenly found themselves in a pocket, trapped between the rallying Greek center in front and Greek wings crushing in from both sides. The narrow plain became a killing box. There was nowhere to retreat. Behind them was the marsh. To the sides were bronze walls of shields and spears, grinding inward. This was encirclement. This was canny before canny. This was the double envelopment that military theorists would study for the next 2,000 years. The Persians fought with desperation. This was no longer a battle. It was a massacre geometry. The Greeks pushed inward from 3 sides, compressing the Persian mass into tighter and tighter space. Men couldn't swing weapons, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The dust was so thick it became darkness at noon. The screaming, gods, the screaming, was inhuman. The killing lasted 17 minutes. Persian soldiers at the rear of the pocket broke first. They ran, not in organized retreat, in pure panic. They fled toward the beach, toward the ships, throwing down weapons and armor, abandoning wounded comrades, thinking only of survival. The disciplined empire troops became a mob. The Greeks pursued, not in revenge, in tactical necessity. A retreating enemy who reaches his ships can sail away and return tomorrow. An enemy destroyed cannot. The pursuit became a foot race. Persians running through the marsh, drowning in mud and water. Persians splashing through the shallows toward ships already pushing off. Persians trampled by their own men in the chaos. Greek hoplites, still in armor, still organized, caught them and cut them down in the surf. At the water's edge, Callimachus died. He'd led the charge personally, had been among the first to reach the ships, and was pulling a Persian trireme back to shore when he was hit by multiple arrows. He died standing upright, armor-riddled, one hand still gripping the ship's ornamental stern. Cynaegirus, brother of the playwright Aeschylus, suffered worse. He grabbed the stern of a ship with both hands and held on, refusing to let go even as Persian marines hacked at him. They cut off one hand. He held with the other. They cut off the other hand. According to witnesses, he tried to hold on with his teeth before he was finally killed. This is not glory. This is madness. This is what happens when men fight with the understanding that their wives and children are 26 miles away, undefended. When the Persians finally managed to push off enough ships to escape, the water off Marathon was red. Bodies floated in the tide. The beach was carpeted with the dead. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. When the dust settled and the counting began, the numbers told a story that contemporaries struggled to believe. Persian dead, 6,400. This is Herodotus's number, and modern historians generally accept it. 6,400 men, killed on the plain, drowned in the marsh, cut down in the surf, or dying of wounds afterward. Roughly 1/4 of their entire invasion force, obliterated in under an hour of actual combat. Athenian dead, 192. Read that again. 192. These weren't anonymous statistics. In a city-state of 40,000 adult male citizens, every man knew multiple casualties personally. Each of the 192 had a name, a family, a farm. Each was mourned individually. They were buried on the battlefield itself, an unprecedented honor, in a mound that still stands today, visible from the plain. The mathematical impossibility of these numbers haunts military historians. In ancient warfare, when armies fought to exhaustion, casualties were typically equal or favored the defender. Winner might lose 10 to 15% of their force. Loser might lose 20 to 30% if routed. Total casualties combined rarely exceeded 25% for both sides. At Marathon, the Persians lost 25% of their force. The Greeks lost less than 2%. This wasn't a battle. This was a perfect ambush executed by men fighting for their survival. The Persian fleet, what remained of it, didn't sail home. They sailed around Cape Saunion, exactly as Miltiades had predicted, racing to reach Athens before news of the defeat arrived. They assumed the city would still be undefended, ready for the taking. But Miltiades had planned for this too. He selected his fastest runner, a man named Miltiades, who'd already run to Sparta and back, 280 miles round trip, begging for help before the battle. Despite having just fought at Marathon in full armor, Miltiades ran the 26 miles to Athens in full battle gear to deliver the news. Nu epsilon nu iota kappa kappa alpha mu epsilon. We have won. The legend says he delivered the message and died. The truth is both more complex and more interesting. The Athenian army force marched 26 miles and less.
Then 8 hours, still wearing armor, still carrying equipment, having not slept, to reach Athens before the Persian fleet arrived. When Persian ships pulled into Phalerum Bay expecting an undefended city, they found 10,000 Greek hoplites waiting on the shore, battle-tested, blood-stained, unbroken. The Persian fleet stared at the army that shouldn't exist, that should have been dead on Marathon Plain. And then they turn around and sail back to Asia. The invasion was over. But the question remains, why did it happen? How did 10,000 farmers defeat 25,000 professional soldiers? The answer lies not in Greek heroism, though heroism was certainly present, but in tactical precision masquerading as madness. Miltiades understood Persian doctrine. The Persians expected conventional warfare, armies forming up, exchanges of arrows, cavalry charges to break formations, infantry cleanup, the playbook that had conquered half the world. Instead, Miltiades gave them something they never encountered, a tactical suicide run that closed the distance too fast for arrows to be effective, that neutralized cavalry before it could deploy, that deliberately invited the enemy to break through the center, while the wings executed a perfect envelopment. The thin center wasn't weakness. It was bait. The mad charge wasn't desperation. It was calculated disruption of enemy preparation. The entire battle was a trap from a first step. Discipline defeated numbers. Preparation defeated experience. Citizens defending their homes defeated professionals collecting a paycheck. But it was a near thing. If the center had broken too early, if the wings had failed to hold, if the Persian cavalry had deployed faster. If any of a dozen variables had shifted, Athens would have burned and we'd be studying Persian as a language of Western civilization. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who values the deep, often overlooked stories that define who we are. Please make sure you're subscribed and have the bell notification turned on. I have a lot more forgotten history to uncover with you, but the story didn't end at Marathon. It had barely begun. 10 years later, Persia returned, not with 25,000 men, but with 200,000. Not a punitive expedition, but a full invasion. Darius's son Xerxes, having spent a decade building the largest army the ancient world had ever seen, marched across a bridge of boats spanning the Hellespont, determined to finish what his father started. The Spartans met them at Thermopylae. The Athenians met them at Salamis. And every time, the Greeks remembered Marathon. Marathon proved something that Persia didn't want to believe, that the unstoppable empire could be stopped, that superior numbers and infinite resources weren't guarantees of victory, that free men fighting for their homes could defeat subjects fighting for their emperor. The strategic impact rippled across centuries. If Athens had fallen in 490 BC, there would be no golden age of Athens, no Parthenon, no Athenian democracy expanding to become the model for Western government. The playwrights Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides wouldn't have existed. The philosophy of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, foundations of Western thought, would have been stillborn. Consider the alternate timeline. Persia conquers Greece in 490 BC. Persian becomes a language of Mediterranean trade. Persian culture becomes a template for civilization. When Rome rises centuries later, it absorbs Persian philosophy, Persian governance, Persian values. The entire trajectory of Western development shifts eastward. Democracy, that fragile experiment only 40 years old when Marathon was fought, would have been crushed in its cradle. The idea that government should serve the people rather than the other way around would have been forgotten, a failed experiment of a destroyed city-state. Instead, Marathon bought Athens 10 years. 10 years to build the navy that would destroy the Persian fleet at Salamis. 10 years for Greek city-states to learn that unity was survival. 10 years for democracy to prove itself worth dying for. The Athenians knew this. When they later built the painted stoa in Athens' central agora, they commissioned massive murals of Marathon, not of the gods, not of mythical heroes, of citizen soldiers, potters and farmers and merchants, standing in formation, pushing back an empire. Aeschylus, the playwright, fought at Marathon. When he died decades later, his epitaph didn't mention his plays, the foundations of Western drama. Instead, it said, Aeschylus of Athens, son of Euphorion, lies beneath the stone. The groves of Gela can tell of his courage. The Medes who felt at Marathon can tell of it too. He wanted to be remembered not as an artist, but as one of the 192 survivors, as a man who stood on that plain and didn't run. For Persia, Marathon was the beginning of the end. Darius died before he could avenge the defeat. Xerxes' massive invasion 10 years later ended in catastrophic failure at Salamis and Plataea. Within 150 years, Alexander the Great, fighting with the phalanx tactics perfected at Marathon, would conquer the entire Persian Empire from Greece to India. The empire that seemed invincible in 490 BC would be ashes by 330 BC, destroyed in part because Marathon taught Greeks they could win. What is the lesson of Marathon? It's not the simple patriotic narrative of freedom versus tyranny, though that element exists. It's not about Greek superiority, though Greek tactics proved superior that day. It's something more fundamental about the nature of warfare itself. Courage is not enough. The Persians were courageous. They stood and fought against impossible odds once the trap closed. Numbers are not enough. The Persians had more than double the Greek force. Experience is not enough. The Persians were professional soldiers fighting part-time civilians. What won Marathon was something else. Tactical innovation born from desperation. Miltiades looked at the mathematics of impossible odds and refused to accept them. He studied his enemy's doctrine, identified the assumptions that doctrine rested upon, and violated every one of them. The charge that was supposed to be suicide became the disruption that prevented proper deployment. The weak center that was supposed to guarantee defeat became the bait that lured the enemy into the killing pocket. The wings that were supposed to be vulnerable became the jaws of annihilation. Marathon teaches us that superiority is contextual. The Persians were superior in every measurable category: numbers, experience, equipment diversity, logistical support, strategic mobility. But they were fighting the wrong battle. They prepared for conventional warfare and got revolutionary tactics. This is a pattern repeated throughout military history. The American colonists defeating the British Empire, the Vietnamese defeating American forces, the Afghans defeating superpowers. It's not about courage or righteousness. It's about understanding that the rules of war are not fixed, that doctrine is merely yesterday's innovation calcified into assumption. But there's a darker lesson, too. Marathon was a near-run thing. The margin between triumph and annihilation was razor-thin. If any element had failed, if the charge had been stopped by arrows, if the wings hadn't held, if the center had routed too quickly, the same tactics will be studied today as examples of arrogant overconfidence, leading to destruction. The Greeks didn't win because they were destined to win. They won because Miltiades made a series of desperate gambles and the dice fell his way. They won because Callimachus cast a deciding vote to fight. They won because 10,000 farmers were willing to run at death wearing bronze in the heat. And they won because they understood something the Persians didn't: that men fighting for their families fight differently than men fighting for their emperor's glory. Not more bravely. The Persians were brave, but with different calculation. When you're fighting to protect your home, retreat isn't tactical flexibility. It's doom. You don't get to live to fight another day, because by the time another day comes, your wife and children are slaves. That understanding made the Greeks do things professional soldiers knew were impossible, made them run a mile in armor, made them stand when the center broke, made them march 26 miles after battle to face the fleet, made them, for one afternoon, invincible. The mound where the 192 are buried still stands at Marathon, overlooking the plain. In ancient times, travelers reported hearing the sound of battle at night: clash of bronze, war cries, thunder of feet. Modern archaeologists explain this as wind to the olive groves, acoustic tricks of the terrain. But on September 12th, for 90 BC, 10,000 men stood on that plain and changed the world. And the world never forgot. Today, you can stand on the Marathon plain and see almost exactly what those soldiers saw. The mountains haven't moved. The sea still pounds the shore where Persians died in the surf. The burial mound is a pilgrimage site 30 feet high, visible for miles. Inside the mound, the 192, burned on a single pyre, their ashes buried together, no individual graves. In death as in battle, a single organism, indivisible. When the modern Olympic Games were created in 1896, the Greeks insisted on including a long-distance race commemorating Phidippides' run from Marathon to Athens. That distance, 26 miles, 385 yards, became the marathon. Every time someone crosses a marathon finish line today, they're tracing the route that news of an impossible victory took 2,500 years ago. The Persian Empire eventually fell. Athens eventually fell. Rome rose and fell. Civilizations came and went. But a lesson of Marathon remained: that free men willing to die for their homes are the most dangerous force on earth. That tactical genius can defeat overwhelming odds. That democracy, that strange experiment in government by the people, was worth bleeding for. Herodotus, writing 50 years after battle, interviewed veterans. They told him about the run, the impact, the encirclement, the pursuit. They told him about the 192. They told him about standing on that beach, exhausted, blood-soaked, staring at the retreating Persian fleet and understanding that they just saved not only Athens, but the very idea of Athens. One veteran told Herodotus that he went blind during the battle, not from injury, but from terror. He stood in the front rank, saw a massive Persian warrior advancing on him, and his sight simply vanished. He fought blind the rest of the battle, swinging at sounds, and survived. When it was over, his sight returned. The Greeks believed a god had temporarily stolen his vision to spare him the terror of seeing what he faced. Modern psychologists might call it dissociative response to extreme trauma. But the truth remains, men broke that day in ways they'd never broken before and never would again. And somehow, they stood anyway. That is Marathon. Not a simple story of heroism, but a complex portrait of desperate tactics, calculated risk, and the precise moment when the course of Western civilization hung on the courage of farmers willing to run at death. The dust has long since settled. The blood has long since washed away. But the plain remains. And every year, runners from around the world retrace that ancient route, honoring a victory won not by heroes, but by men who refuse to accept the mathematics of defeat. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how tactical genius and desperate courage shattered an empire, please help us win our own battle against the algorithm by hitting that like button and subscribing. It really does make a difference. And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you had to make Callimachus's choice, vote to fight impossible odds, or wait for help that might not come, what would you choose? I read every comment. Thanks for watching, and check out the video on your screen now to see how another impossible victory changed history forever. Until next time, keep questioning the official story.